one legendary ruler, one catastrophic reputation, and a legacy covered in literal filth. Constantine V transformed the Byzantine Empire, but his radical war against holy icons earned him a name that translates to the dung-named. Discover how a powerful monarch lost the battle for his public image and became history's most insulted emperor. He inherited an empire that survived by improvisation, borders collapsing under Arab raids, a treasury stretched thin, and a court where bishops, generals, and palace officials treated legitimate emperor as an argument, not a fact. Constantine's reign would expose what Byzantium truly ran on: army loyalty, disciplined taxation, and control of public symbols. His rise would trigger civil war. His policies would turn theology into state security, and his victories would harden an empire that later generations would denounce. The stakes were always existential: rule or be erased. In 741, when Leo III died, the succession looked orderly only on paper. The empire's defenses depended on the theme armies, provincial military districts, whose soldiers fought because their land and pay depended on it. Any rival who captured their allegiance could become emperor by force. Constantine, Leo's son, had the legal claim, but legality did not stop a coup. Within months, Artabasdos, a senior commander tied to the throne by marriage, moved like a man who knew the capital's mood. Seize Constantinople, seize the story. Artabasdos did not just take the palace, he took the icons. In the city's churches, supporters restored holy images and staged public devotions that signaled a return to true faith. A patriarch was installed who would bless the usurper, turning liturgy into a weapon. Urban crowds and monastic networks, already hostile to Leo III's icon policies, now had a banner and a candidate. Constantine was forced into the provinces where legitimacy was negotiated in barracks, not sanctuaries. The immediate question became brutal: which army would march, and for whom? Constantine's response was not a sermon. It was a payroll and a promise. From Anatolia, he sent sealed letters to Strategoi, theme commanders demanding oaths and offering rewards, while warning that hesitation meant confiscation and disgrace. Units that owed their survival to disciplined frontier defense, especially the Anatolian themes, rallied to him. The decision split the empire into rival fiscal machines. Whoever held soldiers could collect taxes, and whoever collected taxes could hold soldiers. Artabasdos had the capital's applause. Constantine had the fields that fed the army. The civil war became a test of endurance and signaling. Constantine advanced toward Constantinople with troops who expected him to win, because losing meant their land grants and status would be exposed to retaliation. The city's gates and harbors mattered more than theology now. Control of grain and access to reinforcements decided loyalty. When Constantine finally broke in, the settlement was exemplary. Artabasdos and his sons were publicly humiliated and blinded, a punishment meant to end debate by removing rivals from the political world. Mercy would have invited a second coup. Terror was administrative. Victory taught Constantine a lesson he never forgot. Icons had functioned as a political switch. Artabasdos had used images to create instant legitimacy among monks and city dwellers. The capital's religious mood had become a military factor. Constantine concluded that sacred imagery was not neutral devotion, but an opposition network with a public face. If emperors allowed that network to control what orthodoxy looked like, they would be hostage to it. The next phase of his reign was not simply religious reform. It was an attempt to disarm a rival power center without admitting it was political. To do that, Constantine needed a legal-looking verdict that could travel farther than his personal authority. In 754, he convened a council at Hyria, across from Constantinople. It was a controlled assembly, bishops present, the emperor's pressure unmistakable, and, crucially, no representation from Rome, whose approval would have complicated the outcome. The council condemned the veneration of icons and ordered their removal, framing the policy as defense of the incarnation rather than an imperial crackdown. The decision was then broadcast through decrees read aloud. So every parish heard that obedience was now orthodoxy. Once doctrine became state policy, enforcement turned to institutions that could resist. Monasteries were not just prayer houses. They were landholders, employers, and information hubs, often protected by popular reverence and elite patronage. Many enjoyed economic advantages that shrank the tax base and pulled labor away from military households. Constantine's officials moved against monastic property and influence, confiscations, forced secularization, and pressure to abandon vows because monks represented a parallel authority that could shame emperors and fund dissidents. Breaking them meant turning spiritual prestige back into taxable, governable assets. The confrontations produced scenes designed for public memory. Hagiographic sources describe monks dragged before officials and ordered to trample icons. Some accounts emphasize forced marriages of former monks and nuns as deliberate humiliation. Even allowing for exaggeration, the pattern reveals Constantine's intent: make resistance look costly and compliance normal. When a celebrated monk, Stephen the Younger, emerged as a focal point of iconophile defiance, his arrest and eventual killing in 765, reported as a public lynching by hostile writers, became a warning. Authority was being enforced in the streets, not just in courts, but repression created its own instability. Each punishment made martyrs. Each confiscation made enemies with networks. Constantine was forcing a choice: society, accept the emperor's theology or accept the risk of being marked as disloyal. The structural constraint was constant war. The empire could not afford a politically autonomous religious sector while frontiers bled resources. So he sought a counterweight that answered only to him. Out of this logic grew a more centralized military corps around the capital, units whose future depended on imperial favor rather than provincial relationships. Constantine strengthened the army not only with campaigns but with architecture of loyalty. New or expanded elite regiments near Constantinople, commonly associated with the later Tagmata system, that could police the capital and deter coups. This was personal rule translated into payroll. Soldiers tied directly to the emperor reduced the leverage of any single provincial commander to imitate Artabasdos. It was also a bet. A more professional, centrally loyal force required money, and money required tighter fiscal control. Constantine's icon policy and his military restructuring were not separate projects. They fed the same appetite for command. Against the Umayyads and later the Abbasids, Constantine's strategy favored pressure and disruption over miraculous conquest. He campaigned repeatedly in Anatolia and beyond its southeastern edges, aiming to break raiding cycles, recover captives, and deny enemies easy prestige. When opportunities appeared, he used them to reshape populations. After operations around northern Syria, sources report captives and relocated communities moved into imperial territory. These transfers were not humanitarian gestures, they were demographic engineering. Settlers could be placed where manpower was thin, strengthening frontier districts that kept the tax and recruitment machine alive. The northern frontier demanded the same ruthless calculus. Bulgaria's khans tested Byzantium whenever the emperor looked distracted, because a successful raid could shake confidence in Constantinople itself. Constantine responded with relentless expeditions, some costly, some triumphant, refusing to let a rival state set the rhythm. In 763, he won a major victory near Anchialus, a battlefield decision that signaled to both army and court that the emperor brought results. Yet the very frequency of campaigning shows the constraint. There was no final settlement, only repeated demonstrations that the throne still controlled violence. These wars forced administrative reforms with long tails, strengthening themes, tightening tax collection, and repopulating vulnerable regions turned survival into system. Soldiers needed land and reliable provisioning. The state needed taxpayers who could not easily slip into monastic exemption or aristocratic protection. Constantine's government pushed toward a harder, more militarized social order, where service and revenue were moralized as defense of the Christian empire, even as he rejected the icons many Christians loved. Stability in his framework was obedience. Alternative sources of loyalty, monastic charisma, independent bishops, charismatic rebels had to be reduced. His greatest defeat came after his victories, the war over memory. Iconophile chroniclers, Many writing under later regimes preserved a nickname meant to end discussion. Copernicus, the dung named, they attached it to a story that as an infant he defiled the baptismal font, converting political hatred into cosmic disgust. In their narratives, he becomes a monster who persecuted the holy and mocked the faithful, so that his battlefield success reads like divine testing rather than competence. It was propaganda with a purpose. If the emperor was filthy, his policies were illegitimate by nature. Yet another picture survives in the outlines of what he left behind. The empire did not collapse, it hardens. Administrative continuity and military resilience suggest a ruler who understood constraints and forced institutions to meet them. Some modern historians argue the worst persecution stories reflect the agendas of monastic authors who regained influence later. Others stress that even strategic iconoclasm was still coercion, and coercion leaves real scars. Either way, the consequence is clear. Constantine's opponents wrote history from the pulpits and scriptoria that his policies tried to silence, and they wrote it to win. In 775, Constantine died while preparing yet another campaign, the throne passing to his son Leo IV. The iconoclast system remained in place, but court politics shifted as new personalities gained leverage. When Leo died young, his widow Irene of Athens governed for their son and cultivated iconophile alliances as a base of legitimacy. In 787, the Second Council of Nicaea restored the veneration of icons, not merely reversing a doctrine, but overturning the moral verdict of an era. Rehabilitation for images demanded condemnation of the man who had banned them. Constantine V's legacy lives in the collision between state survival and sacred representation. He proved that an emperor could rebuild coercive capacity, army, taxes, resettlement, coup-proofing, while still losing control of how posterity judged him. The long-term consequence was a Byzantium more centralized and militarized, yet also more aware that theology could destabilize rule as surely as an invasion. His reign warns that power is not just what armies enforce, but what institutions remember. Constantine secured the empire's borders. And welcome to the Epic History Tales channel. Subscribe to the channel if you want to watch the similar video